My name is Christian Basel. Years ago, I had an idea. I got myself a Tardis. Took it to new places, met a lot of new people, took some great pictures, and talked Doctor Who. From Krypton Radio and the creators of the Hanging With Web show, this is the legend of the traveling TARDIS. Join me on my latest adventures and become part of the legend. And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Whovians all over the world, whether you're on lockdown, quarantine, or whatever you want to call it, house arrest, as Simon Fisher-Becker calls it, you're listening to the legend of the Traveling TARDIS radio show, and we're hoping you're staying safe out there. My name is Christian Basel, the host of the legend of the Traveling TARDIS radio show, whether you're listening to us on iHeartRadio, Krypton Radio, Spotify, Spreaker, whatever. Thanks for joining us once again there. We've got a special guest on tonight, but let me introduce our special panelists that are with me tonight here, starting off with the lovely director of our show, Melanie Dean. How you doing there, Melanie?
Doing quite well. Quite well. Lots
I
of words,
love your shirt.
same ones.
I love your shirt.
I'm branded and logoed with the Traveling TARDIS. Also, it's clean.
Artist Melanie Dean, and if you want, it's still up. You can go to the Legend of the Traveling TARDIS Facebook page, and you can see her video with the kids on her painting with the Good Omens painting.
Yes.
That was right?
Yes, did the Good Omens live painting, and then did a lot of how-to drawings with the kids over at CyberCon 2020. And I've just been doing live painting like crazy now since there's nothing. I can't go outside, so I might as well keep painting and possibly drinking, but mostly painting.
And I brought in a good friend of ours, special author herself of The Rite of Wands. We have the lovely Mackenzie Flohr. How you doing, Mackenzie?
Oh, I'm doing great. I haven't cast Adrucia Reticula yet, so we're already in good shape.
Awesome. And if you notice there, it looks like I'm in a TARDIS bunker in the man cave. I think this is the first time I've done a nighttime, and usually I've got the sun as an advantage to balance out the light, but now I've only got the one spotlight here, so I look like I'm in a TARDIS bunker. If you're watching us on the YouTube channel, you're getting a good show right now from me. Speaking of a good show, let me introduce you to our special guest over here. I haven't talked to him in quite some time. I love that he's back over here. Many of you who have watched the first series of Doctor Who in its return, its reboot on 2005 with Christopher Eccleston, you know his work. It was a lovely piece of work. One of my favorite episodes of the new reboot. Probably, you know what? Of all of the episodes, for the most part, there he wrote the episode Dalek, and you also yes, you did, and he also wrote some. And I don't, you know what? Not to down classic Who writers like Robert Holmes and everybody, but I do have to geek out a little bit because you are one of my favorite writers, especially for Big Finish. I'm going to go into what I'm talking about a little bit later. But ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Mr. Rob Shearman.
Hello.
Hello there. And his request, we're recording in the wee hours of the morning.
It's 10 to 2 in the morning here.
I know. Why? Your wife is asleep. You go down.
I only really feel happy at nighttime. I think that there's a very good reason for it. I mean, it ought to actually at the moment, with the whole. I don't know whether you've heard about this global pandemic thing going on, but
such an inconvenience.
Wait, what? What's going on?
We're kind of doing all social isolation thing. So I mean, my difficulty with the daytime for me, is that it's full of people, and I keep outside my window, and I don't understand what they're doing there. I mean, they don't do anything to me, but they keep walking past my house, and I find that very suspicious. So, what's quite good about nighttime is that they're usually in bed, and this is genuinely true. I mean, for the last 30 years since I became a writer, this is about the time of day when I just think, actually, I kind of own the world now. So, now is actually when I can write all the really stupid, crazy stuff that I always think in the morning I'll cross out. And then the morning comes along, and I'm so desperate to have actually got some work done. I just think, I better just keep it. And so, it's always that feeling that at night time you can be a bit more daring, and so I always just feel I don't know, just a bit more myself at night time. It's actually why I really enjoy being, if I come to the States, you know, well, obviously I've seen you in Orlando, Christian,
Yes.
and I'm always still on British time while I'm there, so I'm actually kind of coasting along in this sort of 3-4 a.m. feeling in my body, which makes me feel I can just say and do really stupid things at Doctor Who conventions. Whereas, you know, back home in Britain, I would at that point be very, very miserable and quite curt. And yeah, so if I'm going to do a podcast, you know, I always advise people to try and catch me at the optimum hour, which is when I don't need mind what I say so much, which is now, which is good. And also, you know, I do find it's a strange thing. I'm not really enjoying the pandemic as much as I expected to, and I start the day feeling. Yeah, it's weird.
Could you define enjoying?
I mean, obviously, when they announced it, I thought, yeah, that sounds like a fun thing. You know, it was about sort of, when people were mentioning it back in about January, I thought, yeah, you know, a worldwide plague, that's going to be a laugh.
I don't see you as an introvert as much.
And yet, strangely, it's actually been really horrifying and terrible and soul-destroying. And I wake up most mornings, and it's a bit like the Groundhog Day thing, where you wake up and you realise you're back in the global pandemic. And I spend the first few hours of the day feeling it's a little bit hard to motivate, to be honest. And as the day goes on, I begin to feel a bit more assertive of myself. But it's the strangest thing, you know. I mean, we've been here in lockdown here in London for about a month, and it's funny how quickly you begin to lose your sense of self and your sense of balance, and I find that actually quite scary. I mean, I watch TV programs. I was watching The Simpsons a few days ago, and I got really anxious for them because they weren't self-isolating. You know, they had all of those kids on the school bus. Mm-hmm. And I was anxious for them. I was kind of wincing, and I thought, but they're not real. I mean, they're only yellow cartoons. But I was, even at this stage, only 4 weeks in, only watching it in a sort of COVID-19 way. And you begin to wonder, you know, I mean, just how much that's going to. I mean, I'm not sure that I'm ever going to be able to emerge from home and ever hug anybody again. I mean, I suspect I'll just be too scared. You know, if I go out to see.
So? You think so?
Possibly. I don't know. I mean, I've had COVID-19 now.
Yes.
I'm getting much better, and I'm good enough now that I can go out and do a little bit of basic exercise.
Would
you
mind
still
telling?
Find that if I'm walking down the pavement, you know, I try very hard to keep away from people because I don't want to risk them being. I mean, I know I'm no longer infectious, but you still worry, you know. So I'm sort of finding that I'm turning myself into a complete social pariah, which is a concern, a little bit. So again, you know, this time of night is great for me, you know, because I can actually just feel that I'm not going to infect anybody.
Now, what was your experience like for maybe people who are not, you know, we hear the stories and all that, but what was your experience of having, or would you mind talking about that? Is that a touchy subject?
No, that's fine. I mean, I don't want to bore people with it either. I mean,
No, that's all right.
I mean, I had it relatively mildly, I think. I got it pretty early on. I was a bit in denial of it for a few days. I began with the constant dry cough. And I just thought, well, that's just a dry cough. I mean, I'm always coughing. And I thought, yeah, but I'm usually coughing to clear my throat. I'm not just coughing. But I was still trying to pretend I wasn't suffering. And then I began getting quite achy. And then it was, and then one evening, my wife just said to me, you know, I really think we should take your temperature. And it was about 102. And she said, look, I don't think there's any way of denying this. I think you've got COVID-19. And I was, and I felt guilty mostly. I felt guilty and stupid. It was the early days of it. And I'd spent I wasn't. At this point, I hadn't left the house in many days. I mean, as soon as any signs of it came on, I did self-isolate. But I still felt in some strange way a little bit like I could only have got this because I wasn't being careful, and that was the concern I sort of felt for the time I was suffering from it, and it wasn't too bad for me. I mean, I think that the biggest problem in some ways has been that coming out of it, I still feel mentally quite sluggish and I feel physically quite weak most of the time. And my joints ache quite a bit. And that's now been about 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I think what became very obvious to me was that, I mean, I'm basically fine. And I knew I was going to be fine. I mean, I only had breathing problems for maybe half a day, and that was the only really frightening part. But beyond that, I thought, well, I'm going to be fine. But it was so obvious because it really does hit you that more vulnerable people wouldn't be, and that was actually what was frightening. I mean, it isn't that, you know, that if you get this, you are going to be doomed. It's kind of knowing that you might be dooming somebody else, and that actually becomes the worst thing, as indeed I did to my wife, who is older than I am, and she was hit by it harder than I was, and I was aware all the time that she was suffering, but of course I'd given it to her, and so I felt this sort of double guilt, you know. I mean, and she's doing fine now as well, and
good.
But you know, but I think that's the worst thing. I think the oddest thing about it, I mean, not to turn this into a big COVID-19 chat, but is that I have so many friends now who I know here in London, because it's pretty bad here in London, really. Mm-hmm. And we all have slightly different symptoms, and that's alarming. And we can't get tested here. I mean, there just isn't the testing facility. So we're still, even if we're fairly sure we've had it, like I am, there's still an element of doubt. You still think, well, maybe I'm just pretending I had it, maybe to make myself look important or something. Deep down, I just had a really bad cold with the temperature thing and the fact that I suddenly couldn't taste food, and I mean all the things that you are told are COVID-19, and yet you still think, that was it? And if I can't be sure it was, then maybe I'll get it later, and then it'll be really awful. Yeah. So it's a very odd thing. You know, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I must apologise to everybody out who's listening to this. I mean, I look quite wan at the moment, and I'm quite an arrogant, egotistical man. And I just thought, I don't want to be on the podcast where I just look dreadful. So I thought it'd be better to have the whole voice experience this time.
Right, but you have a past, and what I was trying to do is, and especially you had the virus. I know there are some friends out there who are concerned that they may have had it, and you know, and my friend Mackenzie right here on the show, she thought she had it, but her advice is to take it one step at a time. Luckily, she didn't have the virus, but I mean, when you start having those symptoms and everything, it is dreadful, and when you start to understand, you know, now that you have it, what happens next, and I can sympathize. The worst feeling that anybody could take on is that not only did you get the virus, but you gave it to somebody you love, and that's something that almost feels damning. Yeah. Speaking of damn, go ahead.
I mean, to be fair, I don't actually love my wife. I mean, it's a very, very old marriage.
Wait, hold that thought, Rob. We're gonna go.
You're never gonna hear this.
Okay, we're going to commercial now.
We're going to commercial break.
Think about what you're about to say.
We're going to come back with Rob Shearman, COVID-19 survivor and writer of the Dalek, the episode Dalek in the Christopher Eccleston series, where we return. Please continue to stay logged on to it and become part of the legend and stay safe. We'll be right back.
It's Germany, 1938. Charlotte is a 15-year-old girl living in the Jewish quarter. George lives in the city proper, and enamored by Charlotte's charm and grace when she wanders into his cobbler shop, George decides right then and there that he is going to marry her. Follow along as this unlikely couple struggles to stay one step ahead of the Gestapo and their dramatic escape from Nazi Germany. Good Things Always Happen in Springtime from author Joanne Fisher on Amazon.com today.
Alien invaders enslave Earth.
Unleashing hunters into the ruin wastes.
One young survivor struggles to elude their monsters, clinging to hope.
When he's stolen off the planet by a sarcastic Starship AI, they pit their uneasy alliance against a treacherous galaxy.
Explore a whole new verse of barbarism and betrayal.
Wonder and adventure.
In the Scion series
by Michael J. Allen.
Beginning with Book 1, Scion Conquered Earth.
Available in print, ebook, and audio on Amazon.com.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to The Legend of the Traveling Tardis. My name is Christian Basel. Welcome to our radio show. I have my panelists here, my good friend and director, Melanie Dean, and I have also our good friend, Mackenzie Flohr, the writer of The Right of Ones. And speaking of writers, we have COVID-19 survivor, as we just found out, and writer of Dalek, and some other Big Finish good stuff, Rob Shearman. I'm glad you're feeling better, Rob.
Thank you.
You said your wife's doing better, well, right? She's
yeah,
on the...
yeah. I mean, she's now in bed, so I can say anything I want to. And you know what? She's never going to hear this because she's not.
While Rob's away, the wife's away.
I'll just tell her that I was nice about her.
Yes.
I'll just say that I was quite supportive. I mean, frankly, I think she's coping far less well and far less heroically than I did. Mm-hmm. With COVID-19, and I think she gets. Yeah, I mean, I think that she deserves it far more than I did. I'm just
the humility. I love it.
Oh yeah. Now, speaking of writing, I have kept this. This is still have been in my Doctor Who entourage, and for those of you watching on the YouTube channel, I want you to show you this. This is one of two of my favorite CDs. Maybe I'll do the other one first, because this one is the one that we actually had an episode about, and I told people and friends of mine, if there is ever a gateway drug, and if anybody asked me when's a good way to get into Big Finish, I told them to listen to The Holy Terror.
Oh, right. Okay.
That was one of my favorites. I'm sure you've been asked 100 times over here, but just of our friends who are not familiar with the story of Big Finish, a penguin? A shape-shifting penguin? I love it.
Yeah.
Trust me, I love it there. And you wrote the Maltese penguin too, so that was a start. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, it wasn't actually my idea. I mean, the original thing was that Big Finish, back in 1999 now, so a long time ago, Big Finish asked me whether, because they knew I was a Doctor Who fan, but I was also at the time writing for BBC Radio. So I didn't know them very well, but I've been at university with Nick Pegg, who was the director of The Holy Terror.
Really?
Yeah, and he said to me, he told Gary Russell about me, and Gary approached me, and they had this idea that they were going to try and get Tom Baker at that stage to do some audios, and he said, would you write a page synopsis, of this story? And so I wrote one, and Tom Baker, I think at the time, fairly famously hated them.
What?
I mean, he probably didn't read them. I mean, that's what I sent to myself. But he said at a convention shortly afterwards, he said, "Oh yes, I've been sent some Big Finish ideas, and I just let them all fall into the bin where they deserve to be," which was, I mean, hard. When you're a big Doctor Who fan to hear that. But when the Gary came back to me and said, "Well, it's fine. I mean, we would start to do the story if you'd write it, but we only have two different requirements. One is that it's now Colin Baker, not Tom Baker." And I said, "Yeah, that's fine." And he said, "And also, I'd like there to be a shape-shifting penguin in it." And I said, "Oh,
just like that. You just can't."
Yeah, I mean, that was the commission brief. And I said, fine, because I'd been a big fan in the 80s, and I'd read Frobisher in the comics, and actually I was really grateful for it, because the Holy Terror is this sort of strange medieval castle-like thing, and making, having to remind yourself at all times that you've got a walking, talking penguin within the drama means that you can't take it too seriously. And I think that the danger of that, of my first Big Finish, would have been that I wouldn't have made it very funny. And because I'm really a comedy writer, but I'm a big Doctor Who fan. I think that my instinct would have been to have tried to have written, I don't know, The Caves of Androzani or something like that. And as it was, I couldn't, because you can't really write a really serious, heavy Doctor Who story with Frobisher, because he defies that. He's just this wonderfully irreverent, funny character who believes that he is the lead character. I mean, at all times he thinks that the Doctor is the companion, which is great fun to write.
Right.
So I mean, I had an absolute ball writing the Holy Terror. It was such fun, and all the time I was doing it, I was aware that my younger self, you know, the 13, 14, 15-year-old who would have been a massive, you know, so impressed I was doing Doctor Who, would have hated it because he had no sense of humour at all. I think when I was a teenager, I hated Doctor Who when it was trying to be funny. So it was kind of amusing to me to be writing something that I knew that my younger self, whom I despise, would have really hated. It's great. I mean, it makes me very, very happy that if I could go back in time and punch him, I would.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
How could you go, whom I despise? I'm like, you despised your younger self.
Yeah, no, he was seriously, he was awful. I had a Doctor Who fanzine, which I did with a boy from school, and we just wrote these achingly nasty reviews of the episodes on TV because that's what you did when you were that age and a fan. But I remember writing a really nasty review of The King's Demons when I was 13, and then later in Doctor Who magazine Winter Special or something, there was a comment from John Nathan Turner about how upset he'd been about The King's Demons review in my magazine. And I mean, the way that the story ought to go was that I was ashamed, but I wasn't. I thought that was hilarious. And then years later, I went to university, again when I met Nick Pegg, and I was auditioning for Nick for a play he was directing. And he just knew my name from the King's Demons review. And he said, "Oh my God, you're the guy who used to edit Cloister Bell." And, you know, and that wasn't a proud thing because it was a terrible, terrible fanzine. So yeah, I mean, I don't think I was a very nice Doctor Who fan, and I look at things like Twitter now, and I look at, you know, the way in which people can be really spiteful, and I think I can't be convinced that I wouldn't have been one of those people back then. I don't know that I wouldn't have been. I mean, I see people being very, you know, really angry about aspects of the new series all the time. It doesn't matter whether it's, you know, Russell's or Stevens or Chris's time, and I think, you know, and I can be very judgmental about that and think, you know, that they should all grow up and be a bit more polite. And I think that I'd have been the same. I would have been, you know, if someone had, if I had been in a situation after watching Warriors of the Deep to have had, to been able to send a tweet to Johnny Byrne who wrote it, I would have. I suspect it would have been horrible. So, yeah, I mean, I find the thing about doing Doctor Who now, which is so funny. I mean, it was like when I wrote I've just done the Target novelisation for Dalek, and I know how thrilled my younger self would have been by that. But it's kind of funny looking back and knowing that it's kind of it's important to put things in that my younger self wouldn't have approved of because I don't approve of him.
So let me get this straight. You took task of John Nathan Turner, and you became a Big Finish writer and a writer for Christopher Eccleston. Yeah. Chris Chibnall took task of John Nathan Turner. He became a showrunner. So if you find your friends who took task to John Nathan Turner, they have future employment right now on Doctor Who.
Yeah,
is that what we're saying now?
I mean, Stephen Moffat was, you know, would say the exact same thing. I mean, for years. I mean, when I first met him, which was around the time I did Holy Terror, and we became friends, you know, and you'd get him in a pub and just hear him at that point openly mock, particularly 80s Doctor Who, which he now totally is ashamed of. I mean, I don't think he's saying this. It's true. He now looks back at it and just says, it was really good, but at the time it just seemed like the sort of thing that you made fun of. And, I mean, we all did it, because that's what you do with Doctor Who. I mean, Doctor Who is great, but it's also the show that it's kind of fun to see the episodes that you just don't like and just make great fun of them. And that's what I did. But it's a bit cruel. I mean that's why I always feel if I go onto Twitter and I search on my name, and then I see people, making fun of what I've done, I think, well, it's my fault for searching, really, isn't it? I mean, it isn't something which you should really, sort of passive aggressively interfere with. Although I do.
Well, I mean, at some point you just have to turn off. Yeah, I think John Nathan Turner mentioned that. He just, at one point, he couldn't even, read. He would read them and they would just bother him. Oh yeah, it was Andrew Cartmel who said that John Nathan Turner would light a cigarette. He would be reading the reviews, and Andrew would tell him, "You need to stop that. That's not good for your health."
Well, this is it. I mean, and it's the funny thing about it. I mean, people often, not often, but I have been asked a few times why I haven't done any more Doctor Who since Dalek. And, part of the reason is, in all honesty, which is an element of cowardice, is that I kind of got away with Dalek. People broadly like it. And that's only mostly because it was entirely before social media. I mean, what happens now? I have friends who still write the show, and it goes out, and it might be good, and it might not be good. But immediately you go onto social media, you will find hundreds of opinions, and a lot of them will be cruelly negative, no matter what episode it was. And I didn't get that, you see. I mean, what was fun about doing Doctor Who in 2005 was it was pre-Facebook, pre-Twitter. You'd go on Gallifrey Base or Outpost Gallifrey in those days, and I got lucky. I mean, I wrote an episode that fans basically liked overnight, so I didn't have quite the same tirade of a sort of of that reaction that has to come about now. And as time goes by, you think, why would you want to be part of that? I mean, the first thing that Stephen Moffat did when he took over was he just left Twitter because he knew it was going to be hell. Yeah. And of course it would have been. And you can spend, I mean, I find writing hard enough as it is, to be honest, without people telling me that I'm terrible all the time. So I don't really know how people like Russell and Stephen and Chris can actually do it. I mean, how they can be that much exposed when they're trying to fill their days trying to entertain people. I mean, I don't always succeed, and I don't always like what they do myself, but that doesn't change the fact that, that you're aware that, I mean, looking back at John Nathan Turner, I mean, he'd have been crucified had he been on social media back in those days. I mean, he was getting hate mail coming in through ordinary post, people putting stamps on envelopes and people going into fanzines. It would have been very, very possible for Jonathan Turner to have totally avoided all of those fan reactions, and that would have been totally impossible for a man like John now to have been able to do. So it's, it is a weird thing. It's a very, very weird thing.
But I also think John was a man that he loved the fans, and he wanted them to like what he wanted, what he produced, and he wanted to listen to them, and he wanted to take it seriously. Oh, it went the wrong direction, or I had done this. But I always thought John, because he came here in the States when when Doctor Who was on PBS, and he was doing those pledge drives. And I thought, this is the producer of Doctor Who, a BBC producer, coming all the way over here to do pledge drives. You don't even you shouldn't have to do that. You don't have to do that. But that was the love that he had for not only the material, the show, and the fans as well. And there are a lot of things. Rob, we got a commercial break. When we return, we're going to do. We got more discussion with Rob, and Mackenzie has a question for you, and I have a question about another Big Finish audio. When we return, please continue to stay logged on, tuned in, and continue to become part of the legend. And # stay safe and stay indoors.
Now on Amazon.com, iCoin from author Jeremy Mosby. It's an alternate reality, and the leader of the planet iCoin is none other than Benjamin Franklin. When corrupt officials threaten not only iCoin but the Earth as well, an unlikely chosen one, Jeremy, must face dark foes to save the Earth and iCoin alike. Author Jeremy Mosby takes readers on a superhero's adventure through this compelling and imaginative alternate universe. Get iCoin on Amazon.com today.
Jackie Sonnenberg's My Soul to Keep is a ghost story rooted in the realities of actual cults. When 13-year-old Sky Monroe arrives at her new boarding school, all she can think about is death and connecting with the afterlife. Soon she discovers her school's spirituality group, the Guardians of Light, and they have a secret. They can speak with the dead, and the organization is a cult. But this isn't Sky's only problem. The campus house where Sky resides is haunted, and even the ghosts have an agenda. They intend on getting the souls they want. Filled with mystery and intrigue plucked straight from the headlines, author Jackie Sonnenberg's research and attention to detail give this ghost story an even more eerie atmosphere. Find My Soul to Keep on Amazon.com today.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to The Legend of the Traveling Tardis. We're hoping you're staying safe out there, staying indoors. Thank you for joining us. My name is Christian Basel, the host of The Legend of the Traveling Tardis. I'm here with the lovely director of our show, Melanie Dean, artiste Melanie Dean, and I'm also here with author of The Rite of Wands, Mackenzie Flohr. If you're watching us on the YouTube channel, if you're listening to us, we have also special guest, writer of Dalek, one of my favorite all-time Big Finish CDs, the Holy Terror, and I'm also going to bring this in a little bit, but I know Mackenzie has a question there. Scherzo, and I really want to get into that a little bit. Oh yeah, Scherzo. But Mackenzie, you had a question for Rob. Go for it.
Yeah, I actually have a couple ones. So going back on Holy Terror there,
Right.
I have seen a lot of people on Twitter recently have asked for a spin-off with Frobisher. If Big Finish was going to do that now, would that be something you'd be interested in writing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's strange, really. I mean, Frobisher isn't my character, and yet I'm the only person to have done the Big Finish audios with him. I mean, and when I was asked to do that originally, and when Gary said, you know, stick this talking penguin into your first story, I assumed it was going to be the first of many. I mean, I was also writing Charlie, who was, you know, Paul McGann's companion, and I did, and there was Evelyn Smythe for Colin Baker, and of course we knew at that stage that there were going to be tons of different stories from different authors featuring those companions. So it's been very strange that Frobisher wasn't picked up by anybody else, and yet maybe not, because The Holy Terror was their worst selling audio for many years. And they think that was because of Frobisher. I mean, I hope it was because of Frobisher rather than me. But as a result, Big Finish weren't that keen to do any more. And it's taken quite a few years, I think, for people to start asking for Frobisher audios. But there's no reason why somebody else shouldn't do them as well. I've not done Doctor Who now, any sort of new Doctor Who now, for about 12 years. But I would. But I'm not saying I wouldn't be lured back. And I think if anything would lure me back to Big Finish, it would be the chance to write for Frobisher again, because I did enjoy writing for him an awful lot. I do think he's very funny. And he's actually, you know, this is awful to say, because it just sounds like I'm being very, very, I'm not working very hard, but he's terribly easy to write for. He's just this wisecracking penguin. He kind of writes himself. So, you know, I mean, I'd be sitting there at the computer and just doing Frobisher dialogue and thinking, well, I'm getting paid for this, but this is terribly easy. Whereas writing for Evelyn or for Charlie were actually rather harder. And writing for, you know, and certainly when you're writing for the TV thing, and writing for Rose was quite hard, because you have to try and create Rose. But Frobisher was the easiest companion of all. So, yeah, I mean, sorry, I'm giving a terribly long answer.
No, that's fine.
No,
But
that's fine.
I got to say this. Colin Baker with a Brooklyn accent is not easy on the ears. Trust me, it was really a struggle. I'm sorry.
I'm going to be honest.
I love you, Colin, but
I don't necessarily think that. I mean, the idea of Maltese Penguin, which was mine. I mean, they wanted to give a sort of a free subscriber-only CD, I think.
Yeah.
And you know, I would argue fairly stupidly. They said, "Well, what's been our least-selling audio? Let's do a spin-off of that to try and attract people to join." I had the idea it'd be quite funny to have Colin Baker do Frobisher as well. in a really bad accent, because Colin can do good accents.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm not convinced that Maltese Penguin is the most sensible decision I ever took as a writer. Mind you, I've not heard it back, I think, ever. So I don't know for sure, but I remember having a feeling that it wasn't maybe my finest hour. So yeah, sorry about that.
No, why you apologize? First of all, I liked it. I just couldn't get through Colin's voice. That's it is not palatable when he's trying to do a Brooklyn accent for what 20, 30 minutes, and at some point I actually had to stop and like, no,
Well,
I'll get this later. But like I said, I love Colin, but it was just
it is also one of those strange things that I think. And I remember I think it was Minuet in Hell, wasn't it? It was the first.
Yeah, oh, gorgeous.
The first really American-centric Big Finish audio. And
Yes.
Of course, if you can't do it, you shouldn't do it. And I think accents are always a tremendous problem. I mean, I think we had, to be honest, the same difficulty when we actually made Dalek years later for the TV show, which is that if you're going to populate your entire cast with people not doing their own accent and then pretend that you're going to sell it to the community whose accent you're getting wrong, it's going to really pull them out of the drama. And I think that's an error. It's one of the reasons why, things like Chimes of Midnight, which was, my second Big Finish audio, I think is easier on the ears even than Frobisher, because although Frobisher, he's not really trying to do an American accent. It's a sort of false American accent because he's just because he's sort of impersonating what he thinks of as a sort of cliche New Yorker. It's still not right. Whereas Chimes is just sort of totally sexually repressed English people, which is what I write about most of the time because I am one. So Chimes sounds perfectly normal because it's just full of people who are just like me. Whereas I do think that can be a bit of a problem sometimes when you're trying to be a bit more exotic with your accent.
Well, Minuet in Hell was a brilliant, I think, a brilliant idea, which was it's been a while since I heard it, but I think the doctor was in an insane asylum, wakes up in an insane asylum, and he's convinced, and somebody else is convincing he's not who he is. I thought that was just some brilliant writing over there, but some brilliant writing. Oh, go ahead, sorry. Go ahead, Rob.
No, sorry, I was simply saying yes. I was agreeing with you, yeah.
But speaking of brilliant writing, and I'll show this, anybody in the YouTube channel is going to see this. And I'm sorry about the lighting of the Doctor Who Scherzo. And this one actually is signed by Rob, and I'm going to read it off to you because I kept this for all, and it is a wonderful episode. And I'll try to describe it as best I can to the fans out there because you discussed this to me, and it was just like, this is a brilliant piece of episode because it only has 2 actors, and you were told to make up your own universe where the laws of time and space do not exist.
Yes, that's right.
And it's just India and Paul. But I want to read off to what you said. You said, "Hello, Christian. You have a beautiful soul." Oh, thank you so much there. And I'm going to read this, and I'm going to show this to the YouTube people, and I'll probably post this up later. Exterminate Christian being. And why are there no Daleks in this bloody audio? And if you can see it on the YouTube right there, that's all Rob drawing there on the CD, including the Dalek.
Yeah, well,
you were just bored, and you just started. I said, "Go ahead and sign this," and you really signed it. I mean, I got my money's worth on now.
I think it is one of the greatest shames of me is that I can only draw one Doctor Who monster. It's a Dalek, and I can't even draw that. I mean, my Daleks are terrible. I was on a cruise ship. It is honestly true. I was on a cruise ship lecturing some years ago as a bit of fun about Flemish art. Which I know a little bit about. And so I was going around the Netherlands and Belgium on this ship, and I would be giving talks to 80-year-olds about stuff I didn't know that much about Rembrandt and whatever. And you weren't allowed to discuss while you were on the ship what you did otherwise. So I never brought up the fact I was a writer and I wrote books and I did Doctor Who once. And it was only at the end of my final lecture when I took questions, and this old man just raised his hand and said, "Is it true that you once wrote the Daleks, Doctor Who?" And I said, "Yes, I did do that." a few years ago, and he said, "Would you draw a Dalek for my grandson?" and I said, I'll have a go. And I went back to my cabin and I began practicing how to draw Daleks. And I did it very, very, very badly, but I got it, And what I do now is Daleks as bad as the one that Christian has just showed you. And I do conventions and I draw those Daleks. And then other people like Simon Guerrier from Big Finish come along and they show, and then they draw a Dalek and it's about 1,000 times better than my Dalek. And I feel, Dalek envy, which you don't want to feel particularly. It's awkward. I mean, Scherzo, of course, doesn't have a Dalek in it, which I think makes it.
No, they're jealous about it.
But rather a shame, really. It would be better.
I just love this because of you're taking understanding of both, because the Doctor and Charlie had a huge falling out, and now they're trapped in their own universe that has no definition, and things are happening to them that they cannot explain in our reality, and they're having to. It's a relationship story through sci-fi. And I just want to take. I'm not taking task to you, but I don't think you should apologize for the Holy Terror. It's one of the lovely things that I have about the Holy Terror is, and I'm not trying to say that I'm trying not to compare, but it's almost like a Red Dwarf, meaning that there's this comedy that goes throughout. When I first started to hear it, I thought it was a comedy. I thought it was a brilliant comedy, and it had so many brilliant ideas, but then in the middle it started to become a drama. And at the very end I went from laughing tears to crying tears because of this brilliant piece of work that I just heard, and I was glued to the radio the whole way.
Excellent. No, I mean, well, that's music to my ears. I mean, that's what I like trying to do. I mean, that's what I do. I hope with most of my stuff. I mean, with the book I've just written, I mean, most of it is about the idea of telling stories which, as you go into them, you think this might be one thing, but it kind of mugs you along the way, and it either becomes something which is more comedic, or something which is more tragic, or something which is more horrific, or indeed less. And so, I like the idea that stories don't stay the same, and that your assumptions are being challenged about what you think storytelling ought to be. And Doctor Who's done it many times in the past. One of my favourite Doctor Who stories is The Mythmakers, which I think is a terribly funny story for the first 3 quarters, and then it becomes really, really strange and dark, and the twists in it are deeply unpleasant, and most of the cast get massacred. And I think I can't say for sure, it's too long ago, but I seem to remember that was a massive influence upon the Holy Terror. I mean, the joke I tell about the Holy Terror, which isn't true, but I've told for years, was that I was writing it as a comedy, and then I ran out of jokes. But it was actually intended to be, that at some point, this thing which you're laughing at suddenly bites you and just says, "This isn't funny." And that was my background in theatre when I was writing my early theatre plays. Now, I wrote a play called Easy Laughter back in the early 90s, which was done in New York a couple of years ago. Actually, it was revived, and it was great to go over and see it. And the whole point of that play was about pushing the audience to work out at what point this stopped being something that they ought to be laughing at. And and we would stage the play in traverse so that an audience would always be facing another member of the audience.
Right.
And they'd get angry with each other. I mean, it was fun. I mean, because people would be arguing with themselves at the interval, saying, "Don't you realise where this is going? Why are you still laughing at it?" And I wanted a bit of that with Holy Terror. I wanted a sort of an element that you wouldn't feel betrayed by it because it had been funny, but there was always something lurking behind that you were choosing to ignore, which I think is fun with comedy.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing about comedy is there's always some underlying tragedy that makes it the way it is, that's the thing.
I think it's the Mel Brooks quote, isn't it? It may not be Mel Brooks, which is, he's saying that tragedy is his getting a splinter in his finger, but comedy is you're walking into an open sewer and dying.
Oh gosh.
The idea basically being that anything which impinges upon you is taken seriously, but anything else, anyone else being threatened or affected, potentially is comedy gold.
Right. Speaking of comedy gold, we got to go to our commercial break. That was my best segue. Anyway, when we return, we're gonna continue the last segment with writer Rob Shearman, one of my favorite writers. Yes, I will confess on this show. When we return, please stay logged on, please stay tuned in, and continue to become part of the legend.
Deborah Parmley's Jenna's Christmas Wish.
Santa, if there's one thing I want for Christmas more than anything, it's someone to spend Christmas with. Someone who really wants me to be there.
Head to the mountains of East Tennessee with romance author Jenna Hart for a Christmas writer's workshop. Since her mother passed after a long illness, Jenna has had one wish. She doesn't want to spend Christmas alone. Meeting Niccolo Maldini, cover model and actor, could make more than Jenna's Christmas wish come true. Unless Ember, Niccolo's ex-girlfriend, does something crazy to stop them from being together. It's a mountain Christmas romance you won't want to miss in Deborah Parmley's Jenna's Christmas Wish. Now on Amazon.com.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Whovians all across the whoniverse. Thank you for joining us here at the Legend of the Traveling Tardis. My name is Christian Basel. I'm here with director of our show, Melanie Dean, the director of the show, Melanie Dean, and Mackenzie Flohr, the writer of the Red Wands series. And we have our special guest, Rob Shearman. Rob, we're at the final segment here, and I do want to talk about things like we all hear stories in the dark, and some of the stuff that you got coming up the pipeline here. And before you begin, I'm going to let you guys know, if you're listening to us on any of our social media platforms, including Spreaker, we will have all the links to Rob's books linked up, so you can check them out for yourselves and where you can purchase them. Rob, go ahead. Tell us a little bit about what you got coming up the pipe.
I've written this really weird book. I spent nearly 10 years writing it. And it's longer than War and Peace, which sounds off-putting. And I have this idea that it would be really good fun. You remember those choose your own adventure type things?
Yes.
I wanted to write a book which genuinely you had to go through a maze to read. So that there's a basic story is that a man loses his wife. She dies suddenly, and he finds any way to get her back is to sit in the dark room at the back of a library while this very mysterious old woman narrates to him a series of 101 of the last stories in the world. But at the end of every story, you're asked 5 questions, and the 5 questions lead you to decide whether or not you want to, hear a funny story or a sad story or a horror story or an adventure story, and you start following this sort of strange labyrinth about your own reactions to how stories work. And if you get the right maze, you win his wife back from the dead. But it becomes like a huge game about the way in which we're telling stories.
Wow.
That's intriguing.
Yeah,
because I was huge on Choose Your Own Adventure. So instead of wow.
It's a bit crazy. The problem I was having for years was that I was trying to write this thing because short stories have been a very big part of my life for the last 10 years or so anyway. But before that, I just, after doing Doctor Who, I fell in love with writing short stories, and I got terribly lucky, and collections of mine came out and won things like the World Fantasy Award and Shirley Jackson Awards and stuff. And I began to take them a bit seriously and thinking, this is great writing stuff like this.
Yeah.
And so I got a bit carried away and just thought, it was reading some Borges, actually, where he was talking about books like this, but no one had ever actually really written one. And I thought, well, I should try. And I thought it would take me maybe 3 or 4 years, but as I say, it took really nearly 10. And my agent got very cross with me while I was doing it because I wasn't doing other things. And you go and meet publishers who want to ask you to write novels for them, and you say, well, I'm actually writing this crazy War and Peace length Strange Maze book, and they'd say, "But why are you doing that?" And no one ever really believed, I think, that I'd actually finish it, and I did, and it's coming out now, and it's all and it's trying to be like a sort of one of those old time story books that you'd read when you were a kid. So every story has at least 2 illustrations, and it should be really fun to read. But it is massive, and it comes in 3 volumes that you buy in one go, and the odds against anyone reading the same maze path that you take is, I think, 1 in. I think that it's the odds. I think that there were, if you took all the grains of sand on Earth and multiply by all the droplets of water on Earth, that's still only a fraction of the number of permutations of this book. So the idea of it is, as you read the book, you can literally be certain that no one else will ever read the same book that you're reading, which is kind of fun as well. And and it's exciting. You know, I'm just thrilled that it's actually coming out, because I think halfway through it, I did begin to think it was probably the single stupidest idea that you could possibly have. But I'm terribly proud of it. I mean, being British, I'm always a little bit ashamed of being proud of stuff, but I am. I think it's quite a funny book, and I
thought that was the definition of British anyway. So
yeah, well, I mean, we have many good reasons to be ashamed of many things. But I am actually very, very proud of this book, and I think it's a really fun thing to do. Is to get a copy of this book and then realise that you are rejecting stories and accepting stories, and you've got cats who recite Homer, and you've got spiders as big as the ceiling in it, and you've got talking pigs, and I mean it's full of weird, crazy stuff, but it's kind of fun.
And then you have this overarching strategy to it, to being to saving the man's wife.
Yeah, and it's full of weird things. I mean, there are certain chapters in the book which you can't read unless you cheat, because you can't find them unless you cheat. And then if you find
my God, that's awesome.
The book starts telling you off. And so there's one whole section in the book which is about it gives you 4 stories on the importance of maps while telling you off because you're not following them. Because if you're reading it, it means you haven't followed the map.
Wait a minute, did you write a book or write an episode of Minecraft? I mean, what is...
it's kind of like that. And always sort of, I mean, so there are lots of hidden things through the books as well, which you only really find if you're quite canny. There is a map, and it's hidden in one of the stories, but you have to know that it's a map afterwards to work out, because there is one route through where you can read it, but only one way of doing it. There is one story, because it's 101 stories, but one of the 101 stories is composed of 101 stories itself. So that's quite a long story, but they're 101 small stories. But I mean, it's trying to play with as much possible ways in which you can interpret storytelling as possible. And it was really crazy. And it wasn't, I think, until I'd done the first draft of it, which was about 2.5 years ago, at which point I had to go back and write another 20 stories, because I didn't think 20 of them were actually good enough, which is always it's like painting a bridge. As soon as you reach the end of the bridge, you realise that the bit you did 2 years ago needs to be repainted. So it was a book which I could imagine myself writing forever, and it never been quite good enough. So I was very, very relieved when I sort of hit a point where the publishers eventually said, "We are bringing this out." And I'm, as I say, I mean, I think it's fun, and there are, for Doctor Who fans, there are allusions within the book to my experiences on Doctor Who as well, which is quite fun if you can find them. So autobiographical bits, although are they? Because I make up a lot of the autobiography stuff as well, just for fun, really.
Now I just see you writing an autobiography, but it's a choose your own adventure book starring Rob Shearman.
Someone has done that, mind you. I can't remember who it was now. I think the actor who played Doogie Howser wrote an autobiography, which is a choose your own adventure, so that you keep on dancing around about what he should do in his life next. It's very, very clever, that. So yeah, I mean, I was actually quite jealous when I saw he'd done that. But yeah, and then a few months after that, I've got my target novelisation of Dalek coming out, which will be fun. Which was a bit of a contrast after writing 650,000 words of this to writing 40,000 words of Doctor Who again. But it was a wonderful appetite cleanser in a way to do Doctor Who again. So yeah.
Now you said that this book is bigger than War and Peace. What was it?
Yes.
How many pages did you end up coming to with all the novel, with everything together? I'm just curious.
1,800 pages, I think.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah.
Dang.
I mean, the thing is, I mean that always sounds. I mean, it's possible it could all be on one page if you made the type smaller. I mean, just about. I mean, it would be impossible to read. Although it could be fun, that couldn't it? I mean, maybe that's what I should do for my next book. is try and write a book which actually has such small text that literally no one will ever be able to actually read it. Because that would be as sensible as spending writing this book. Yeah.
Now you just remind me. What was that movie with Sean Connery where all the priests kept dying reading this book? You know what I'm talking about?
The Name of the Rose.
Name of the Rose, and everybody figured it out because the priests would take their finger, lick it, and then do that, and that's how they were getting poisoned. I was just like, don't write a book like that. Rob Shearman writes a book that'll literally kill you in the end. See, I'm afraid I'm good. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No. I was about to say I'm afraid I'm going to read your book. I'm going to start reading it and get through page 3 and die somehow. I
mean, seriously. I mean, people actually have read the book. I mean, what's actually fun about the book is that some people have read it and they come to me and they say that they found it really funny and uplifting and very, very charming because they were following paths towards stories which were actually quite whimsical and quite quirky. And other people read the book and they said that it was horrific. And it was a really, really disturbing experience because there is also to the book, I mean, there is a dark path. I mean, it keeps on trying to keep you away from it. But if you constantly choose stories which are going to get darker and darker, again, you will eventually be asked by the book, why is it you're doing this? I mean, why do you want to keep on staring into the abyss? Why do you not want something in your life which is a bit more fruitful? Mm-hmm. So people can have such different responses to it, which I find wonderful. I mean, that's what I like about it. People who approach me and are just really offended by it can be quite fun. But some people just find it, to say, very, very uplifting, and that's nice too. And it's the same book. It's the same book, but some years ago I read Jane Eyre, and I was too old for it. I read it when I was about 40. And it was that awful realization that if I'd read, and which as I was reading it, I knew that if I'd read it when I was in my early 20s, I would have loved it. And now I was a bit too cynical for it. And it became the obvious realization that stories change according to the order in which we read them. And some of the things that we end up loving throughout our lives are purely because we read them at exactly the right time. And if you read if you think of your most precious book memories and you transpose them to reading them now as adults, you wouldn't have the same experience, and it would be wasted on you a bit. And you can have the nostalgia of that. You know, my wife's favorite books include the Tolkien books. I mean, she absolutely loves The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And I've never read them. And she said to me some years ago, "Don't bother, because you won't get them now." Whereas I read Gormenghast, I read all the Mervyn Peake books at that same time, and I fell in love with them. But I can't reread them now, because if I do, I just find myself thinking, "Oh, I can't recapture that same love." It's the same thing about Doctor Who, I think. You know, I mean, we're now all watching Doctor Who as it goes out. But at some point, all of us jumped on, and all the past Doctor Who stuff had to be, if we watched it, interpreted by us in our own special order. And that actually accounts for whether we like it or not. I love the Chase, the William Hartnell serial, which is terrible. really. But it was my first ever Dalek story, because I got a really ropey copy of it in the early 80s, and I watched it, and I just fell in love with it. And that was my first Dalek experience. And I recognised later that if I'd watched it after watching things like Genesis of the Daleks, I'd probably thought it was awful. But because it was my intro, I mean, my first Doctor Who story I ever properly watched go out was Castrovalva, the first Peter Davison story, and it's in my top 3 or 4 favourite stories of all time. And yet I recognise other people watch it and they're bored stiff by it. But I really, truly love it because I caught it at that right moment. So I think the way that we respond to art and to literature as well is a similar thing. So yeah, I thought I'd try and do a book which really addressed it and makes you realise that you're choosing at all times your own version of how the book works, which is fun.
Well, Rob, I hate to say this, but we come to the end of the show. We've had, speaking of having fun, we've had a great time. Rob, just go ahead. I do have the links that you sent me earlier. We're going to post them again, and I'll put them on the Legend of the Traveling TARDIS. Got to quickly wrap up. Thank you, Mackenzie. Thank you, Melanie, for joining us. Thank you, Rob Shearman. Check out all the stuff. Again, check out the links below if you are listening to us on Spreaker and on the YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us, folks. Again, please stay safe. Please stay logged in and continue to become part of the legend.